is Game Boy World, and this is Shogi. Perhaps you've noticed a trend happening here on Game Boy World. This is the third Japan-only release for the system so far in its life, and this is also the third release based on a traditional Japanese non-video game. First we had Mahjong, then Pachinko, and now there's Shogi, presented in the form of a game called Shogi. Well, no points for originality. I suppose publisher Pony Canyon wanted to get in the door with a minimalist title before Nintendo did, those purveyors of inventive titles like tennis and golf. Still, this case feels a little different than Yakuman and Pachinko Time. Unlike Mahjong and Pachinko, the appeal and mechanics of Shogi aren't particularly difficult for Americans to understand. The core game plays in a remarkably similar fashion to chess, mostly because it's derived from the same traditional Indian game that chess came from, Chaturanga. While Shogi has its own distinct rules to set it apart from chess, not least of which being a 9x9 grid occupied by 40 pieces as opposed to an 8x8 grid involving 32 pieces, the fundamentals should seem quite familiar to anyone who knows chess. Once you take the time to sort out the differences, you chess players could pretty easily transfer your strategic expertise to the game. Not that Shogi for Game Boy necessarily lends itself to working as a learning tool. Like Yakuman, it presumes the player knows the rules of the underlying game, and it's packed with kanji. Even if you can read Japanese, it lacks anything like tutorials. Well, that's not quite true. Besides the standard play mode, Shogi does offer an Exposition challenge mode where you can attempt to solve specific situations, which is a good way to figure out what the heck the different pieces in Shogi do exactly. Yet even then you won't get past the first challenge if you don't understand how dropping captured pieces on the board works. Shogi the traditional game allows you to press the pieces you've conquered into action, but Shogi the Game Boy game expects you to know the rules and intuit your objectives. But really, if you don't read Japanese, why are you messing with Shogi? The pieces in the game aren't conveniently designed with fun shapes like those in chess. These knights don't look like little horses, nor do the various chariot pieces look like little chariots. In fact, there's only one shape for the pieces, a sort of arrowhead form with very moderate differences in size. There's no color coding for the pieces, since you can use your opponent's pieces too. Instead, player sides and allegiance for the pieces are denoted by the direction of the arrowhead. The only differentiation between any of the two sides pieces affects the king tiles in the form of a tiny little mark that changes the meaning of the text written on those pieces. See, each tile in Shogi gets its definition not from its shape, but rather from the kanji printed on the tile. Foot soldiers, lancers, flying chariots, gold and silver generals. Shogi has some pretty interesting terms for its pieces that really make historic Japanese battlefield sound super fascinating. But it's all printed in elaborate handwritten kanji, so if you're not comfortable with Japanese calligraphy, good luck. Besides the Exhibition mode, Game Boy Shogi plays it pretty straight. There's a single standard game mode, Traditional Shogi. You can play solo or with another person, but otherwise, the only option you're given when you start a game is whether to move first or second. It does the trick, I suppose, but nothing more. There's no grace to Shogi, no interesting flourishes. The slight resolution of the Game Boy screen doesn't do the presentation any favors, that's for sure. The board's 81 squares have to be crammed into 160 by 144 pixels with enough space on the right side of the column for discards and scorekeeping. This means the pieces themselves are so small they have to be drawn without their traditional arrowhead shape. It also means each piece only has a single kanji symbol instead of the standard 2, so you're only seeing a partial description. Imagine if you played a game of chess with pieces that were all the same size and shape and simply had a cramped abbreviation printed on them. PWN, KNT, BSH, KNG, etc. And the opponent's pieces were upside down to make the print even harder to read. Now, imagine doing all that with artificial intelligence running on such a low-end processor that the computer sometimes takes 15 to 20 seconds to plan and execute a move. And that is Shogi. It's pretty much the bare minimum acceptable rendition of the traditional game and nothing more. It's not going to make any converts or win any new players, but for a Shogi enthusiast who wanted a convenient way to play on the go in 1989, it was decent enough, I suppose. Shogi was the second Game Boy release for publisher Pony Canyon, aka FCI, after Boxel, but it was their 8th Shogi title total. By 1989, converting the board game into digital form had kind of become their thing. But Shogi was by far the least impressive take on the subject they'd produced, crippled by the limitations of the platform. Slow, cramped, and difficult to read, Shogi is hardly a remarkable part of video game history. It's more a matter of being one of those things that showed up because every system had some version of Shogi in Japan. There would be more impressive renditions of Shogi on Game Boy eventually, but for old geezers who bought the system in its first year of life, this was a boring, functional, completely uninspiring must-have. Ah, finally. 4 more games that will bore you to sleep. Keep reading GameBoyWorld.com.